Every Sunday, Pastor Anthony Cole stood here, bathed in the stained glass glow of the Lighthouse Tabernacle. His gaze swept over the expectant faces, each one a reflection of the hope he preached, the salvation he promised. But today, the weight of those eyes felt different. He could feel it, a cold dread clinging to his crisp white robe, heavier than any sermon he'd ever prepared. He saw Rebecca in the front pew, her smile a familiar comfort, a perfect image of a life he had so carefully curated. Yet, even her presence offered no solace. His mind replayed the desperate words from a phone call just hours ago, a voice raw with a pain he had inflicted, a threat he could no longer ignore. The air in the sanctuary, usually thick with devotion, now felt charged, electric, as if holding its breath. He knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that this morning, the carefully constructed walls of his world were about to meet an unstoppable force. Long before the robes and the pulpit, Anthony Cole walked a different path. South Detroit, a concrete maze where survival was a daily grind, and opportunity often wore a disguise. As a teenager, he moved with a rough crowd, drawn to the quick thrills of the street, the petty scores that promised an escape from the crushing reality of his surroundings. He learned to talk his way out of trouble, a silver tongue honed on street corners, a persuasive charm that could disarm a rival or win over a crowd. But beneath the bravado, a different kind of hunger stirred. Not for money, not for power, but for something more. It was his grandmother, Mama Esther, who saw it first. A fixture in their local church, she never stopped believing in her wayward grandson. "Boy," she'd say, her eyes fixed on him, "the Lord has plans for you. You just have to open your eyes and see them." For years, her words seemed to vanish into the city air. Then came the night that changed everything. A blur of screeching tires, flashing lights, and the chilling silence after a drive-by shooting claimed the life of his closest friend. As Anthony knelt on the cold pavement, cradling his dying friend, something broke inside him. A presence, a calling he couldn't deny, gripped him. The next Sunday, to the shock of everyone who knew him, Anthony Cole walked into a church. He sat in the back, tears streaming, as the sermon spoke of second chances. From that day forward, the streets lost their hold. He devoured scripture with the same intensity he once applied to his hustles. His natural charm, once used for evasion, now drew people to his testimony. He rose fast. Youth groups, guest sermons, then ordination. By 25, he was a minister. His ascent was swift, propelled by passionate sermons and an ability to connect the ancient texts to modern struggles. At 30, he founded the Lighthouse Tabernacle in Detroit. It began small, a rented storefront, but his message of hope resonated deeply in a community desperate for it. 5 years later, the Lighthouse was a thriving institution, its new building a testament to his vision and the unwavering support of his congregation. To the outside world, Pastor Anthony Cole was the embodiment of a modern spiritual leader, dynamic, relatable, committed. His sermons reached thousands, his public presence growing daily. He was everywhere, a kind word always ready. But beneath that polished exterior, Anthony carried a secret, a shadow that threatened to consume everything he had built. Anthony Cole's public life was a carefully crafted sermon. His private life, a different gospel entirely. It began with Clara Cruz. She was everything his ministry wasn't. Raw, impulsive, with a temper that could ignite like wildfire. They met not in a church, but at a bustling Detroit community center where Anthony volunteered a few years before the Lighthouse even existed. Clara was there to pick up her younger brother, a participant in the program. She stormed in, all fire and attitude, ready to confront whoever had kept her waiting. But when her eyes met Anthony's, an undeniable current sparked between them. He was drawn to her fierce energy, her unapologetic nature. She, in turn, was intrigued by this man who radiated a calm purpose she'd never encountered. Their relationship ignited quickly, burning hot and fast. Clara challenged him, pushed him beyond his comfort zone, made him feel alive in ways he'd forgotten. For a time, he convinced himself this was what he needed. Someone to keep him grounded, to remind him of the world he'd left behind. But as weeks turned to months, the cracks appeared. Clara's temper, initially exciting, became a source of constant tension. She grew possessive, prone to jealous outbursts that left Anthony walking on eggshells. More than once, he found himself covering bruises, inventing excuses for the marks on his arms. Still, he couldn't end it. There was a vulnerability beneath Clara's tough exterior, a deep need for love that echoed Anthony's own past. He told himself he could help her, that with enough patience, she would change. Then came the night that changed everything. After a heated argument, Clara stormed from Anthony's apartment. Hours later, a call from the hospital. Clara had been in a car accident. She was fine, but there was more. She was pregnant. The news hit Anthony like a physical blow. A baby. His baby. In that moment, his carefully laid plans, his visions for the future, crumbled. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, he couldn't marry Clara. Her volatile nature, her unpredictability, no environment for a child, let alone a life together. But he couldn't abandon his child either. So Anthony made a decision that would haunt him for years. He would support Clara and Isabella financially, but keep them separate from his public life. It was a compromise that satisfied no one, least of all his own conscience. As Clara's pregnancy progressed, Anthony's star continued to rise in the church. He founded the Lighthouse Tabernacle, pouring all his energy into building his congregation and crafting his public image. All the while, he kept Clara and Isabella a closely guarded secret, meeting them in out-of-the-way places, always looking over his shoulder. Clara, caught in a limbo of resentment and dependence, watched from the shadows as the man she loved became a celebrated figure, always just out of her reach. It was an impossible situation, a powder keg waiting for a spark. And that spark would come in the form of Rebecca, the woman who would become Anthony's wife and unwittingly set in motion a chain of events that would end in bloodshed on the altar of the Lighthouse Tabernacle. Rebecca Cole was everything Clara was not. Gentle, soft-spoken, with a serene presence that seemed to calm everyone around her. She embodied the kind of partner Pastor Anthony believed he needed, both for himself and for his growing congregation. Their paths crossed at a regional church conference in Chicago where Anthony was a guest speaker. Rebecca, a devoted member of her own church and active in various ministry programs, was immediately drawn to the charismatic young pastor. His words seemed to speak directly to her heart, igniting a passion for service she'd always felt but never fully expressed. For Anthony, Rebecca represented a chance at the life he'd convinced himself he deserved, a life free from the chaos and unpredictability that marked his relationship with Clara. Rebecca's unwavering faith, her gentle spirit, and her genuine desire to serve others aligned perfectly with the image he was cultivating as the leader of the Lighthouse. Their courtship was a whirlwind of shared prayers, long conversations about faith and purpose, and dreams of building a powerful ministry together. Rebecca saw in Anthony a man of God, someone who had overcome a troubled past to become a beacon of hope. She felt blessed to be chosen by such a man, never suspecting the secrets hidden beneath his polished exterior. For Anthony, guilt gnawed at him even as he fell deeper in love with Rebecca. He knew he should tell her about Clara and Isabella, but fear held him back. Fear of losing everything he'd worked for, fear of disappointing the woman who looked at him with such adoration. So he convinced himself that his past was just that, past. That moving forward with Rebecca was God's plan for his life. Their wedding was the event of the season in Detroit's church community. The Lighthouse Tabernacle was packed to the rafters as Pastor Anthony and Rebecca exchanged vows before God and their congregation. The couple seemed to glow with happiness, a shining example of Christian love and partnership. As Rebecca settled into her role as the pastor's wife, she poured herself into the work of the church with boundless enthusiasm. She started new outreach programs, counseled young couples, and became a beloved figure among the congregation. Her genuine warmth and compassion complemented Anthony's dynamic preaching style perfectly. Together, they were a force. The Lighthouse flourished under their leadership, expanding its reach and influence throughout Detroit and beyond. They were featured in Christian magazines, invited to speak at conferences, held up as role models. But even as Anthony basked in the glow of his picture-perfect life, the shadow of his past loomed. The carefully balanced worlds of Anthony Cole were beginning to fracture. Clara's demands grew louder, more insistent. The monthly payments, once a grudging acceptance, now fueled her fury. She wanted more than money. She wanted acknowledgement for Isabella, a rightful place in Anthony's life, a life he so publicly shared with Rebecca. Her instability grew, her threats sharper, cutting through Anthony's carefully constructed peace. Anthony's desperation mounted. He tried to manage Clara, to placate her with promises he knew he couldn't keep. His paranoia grew with each furtive call, each secret meeting. The strain began to show, eroding his public composure. He became withdrawn, distracted during sermons, snapping at church staff over minor issues. Dark circles formed under his eyes, betraying sleepless nights. Rebecca, ever the loyal wife, noticed the shift. She attributed his distance to the immense pressure of leading a thriving congregation. "Is everything all right, my love?" she'd ask, her voice soft with concern. "You seem distant lately." Anthony would force a smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Just the weight of responsibility, dear. This anniversary. It's a big milestone. I want everything to be perfect." Rebecca wasn't entirely convinced, but she nodded, squeezing his hand. "We're in this together, remember. Whatever burdens you carry, let me help bear them." Her words, meant to comfort, only deepened the guilt churning within Anthony. If only she knew the true burden he carried. The anniversary celebration of the Lighthouse Tabernacle was fast approaching, a symbol of triumph. But for Anthony Cole, it was a deadline. Clara's patience had run out, and she was about to deliver a truth that would shatter his world and Rebecca's forever. The morning of the anniversary celebration, Anthony was nowhere to be found. A crucial planning meeting hours before the service, and the pastor was missing. Rebecca's unease grew with each unanswered call to his cell phone. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. This wasn't like Anthony. Not now, not with everything riding on this day. Driven by a growing sense of dread, Rebecca decided to check his private study. As she approached the door, she heard his voice, low, urgent, laced with a desperation she'd never heard. He was on the phone. "Clara, please," Anthony pleaded, his voice cracking. "You have to understand. I can't just walk away from everything. There has to be another way." Rebecca froze, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Clara? Who was Clara? And what was Anthony talking about, walking away? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the fragmented words. "No, listen to me," Anthony continued, unaware of his wife just outside. "I'll figure something out, okay? I'll increase the payments. Just please give me more time. Don't do anything rash." The blood drained from Rebecca's face. Payments? More time? The implications crashed down. Her husband, the man she'd built her entire life around, was hiding something monumental. With trembling hands, she pushed open the door. Anthony spun around, the phone still clutched to his ear, his face a mask of shock and profound guilt. "Rebecca," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "I can explain." But in that moment, looking into her husband's eyes, Rebecca knew. No explanation could undo the betrayal. Whatever Anthony was about to say, whatever justifications he might offer, nothing would ever be the same. As the truth began to spill out, haltingly at first, then in a torrent of confession and apology, Rebecca felt her world crumbling. The perfect life she thought she had, the blessed union she believed God had ordained, was built on a foundation of lies. The deepest betrayal was yet to come, a public reckoning that would leave a lasting mark on the very altar of their faith. Across Detroit, in a small, cluttered apartment, Clara Cruz moved with a frantic energy. Her eyes shone with a dangerous mix of determination and desperation. Isabella, sensing the tension, watched her mother quietly. "Mama, where are we going?" she asked, her voice small. Clara paused in her hurried packing, forcing a smile. "We're going to see your daddy, baby. It's time he introduced us to everyone." As she spoke, her hand brushed against the cold metal of the gun tucked into her purse. A shiver went through her, but she pushed away any doubt. This was it. No more hiding, No more empty promises. One way or another, Anthony was going to face the truth today. Back at the Lighthouse Tabernacle, the church was filling quickly. The anniversary celebration had drawn a larger crowd than usual, with visitors from other congregations and community leaders. The atmosphere was festive, excited chatter filling the air as people found their seats. Backstage, in the small room where he usually prepared for services, Anthony knelt in prayer. His words, usually flowing so easily, now came in broken, desperate whispers. "Lord, I have sinned. I have strayed so far from your path. Please give me strength. Show me the way forward." A soft knock interrupted his plea. It was Rebecca, her face composed, but her eyes still showing the pain of betrayal. "It's time," she said simply. Anthony nodded, rising to his feet. As he moved to follow her, he caught sight of himself in the mirror. The man looking back seemed like a stranger, hollow-eyed, burdened, a far cry from the confident leader his congregation knew. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out onto the stage. The familiar swell of music, the expectant faces of his flock, it all felt unreal. Rebecca took her usual seat in the front row, her smile firmly in place despite the turmoil in her heart. As Anthony began to speak, welcoming everyone to this special service, he was acutely aware of the lies that underpinned every word. Lies about God's faithfulness, about the blessings bestowed upon the Lighthouse over the past 5 years, all while knowing that his own faithlessness threatened to bring it all crashing down. Halfway through his sermon, as Anthony built to what should have been an inspiring crescendo, the heavy doors at the back of the church burst open with a crash that echoed through the sanctuary. Every head turned, a collective gasp rose from the congregation. There, framed in the doorway, stood Clara Cruz. Her eyes were wide, her chest heaving with raw emotion. In one hand, she clutched the hand of a confused-looking little girl, Isabella. In her other, Anthony's blood ran cold as he registered the glint of metal. A gun. Clara had a gun. "Anthony!" Clara screamed, her voice raw with pain and fury. "No more lies, no more hiding. It's time everyone knew the truth." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Anthony stood frozen at the pulpit, his mouth open, but no words came out. Rebecca, her face a mask of shock, looked from Clara to her husband, the full reality of the situation crashing down on her. Then, in a blur of motion and sound, chaos erupted. Clara began to move down the aisle, the gun now raised, pointed directly at Anthony. People scrambled to get out of her way, shouts filling the air. Some ran for the exits, while others seemed paralyzed with fear. "Clara, please!" Anthony finally found his voice, holding up his hands in a pleading gesture. "Think about what you're doing. Think about Isabella." At the mention of her daughter's name, Clara's face contorted with rage. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare use her name! You've denied her for years, kept us hidden like we were something to be ashamed of." She was at the front of the church now, mere feet from Anthony. Rebecca, moving on instinct, started to rise from her seat, but Clara swung the gun toward her. "Stay right there!" she snarled. "This is between me and your precious pastor!" Rebecca froze, her eyes wide with fear, not for herself, but for her husband. Despite everything, despite the lies and the betrayal, she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. Anthony, seeing the gun pointed at his wife, felt a surge of protective anger. "Clara, this is madness. Put the gun down. We can talk about this." Clara laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Talk? That's all you ever do, Anthony. Talk and make promises you never keep. Well, I'm done talking. I'm done waiting. It's time for action." She turned back to the congregation, many watching in horrified silence. "You all think you know this man?" she shouted. "Your beloved Pastor Anthony. But you don't know him at all. This girl," she pulled Isabella closer. "This is his daughter, my daughter, the child he's been hiding from all of you for years." A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Eyes darted between Clara, the terrified child at her side, and their pastor, searching for confirmation or denial. Anthony, realizing his carefully constructed world was crumbling, made a decision. No more lies, no more hiding. Whatever happened next, he would face it with the truth. "She's right," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "I have a daughter. I've been living a lie, deceiving all of you, deceiving my wife." He looked at Rebecca, tears welling in his eyes. "I'm so sorry for everything." For a moment, it seemed his confession might diffuse the situation. Clara's hand, still gripping the gun, lowered slightly. But then her face hardened once more. "Sorry isn't enough," she spat. "Sorry doesn't feed our child. Sorry doesn't make up for years of being treated like your dirty little secret." She raised the gun again, her finger tightening on the trigger. "You had your chance, Anthony. Now it's too late." Time seemed to slow. Anthony saw Clara's finger squeeze the trigger. He heard Rebecca's scream, saw her lunge forward as if to shield him. And then, pain exploded in his chest as the first shot rang out. He staggered backward, his hand clutching at the growing red stain on his shirt. 2 more shots followed quickly, and Anthony felt his legs give way. He collapsed to the floor of the altar, dimly aware of the chaos erupting around him. Rebecca was at his side in an instant, her hands pressing desperately against his wounds, her tears falling on his face. "Anthony, stay with me," she pleaded. "Please, God, don't take him." Through the haze of pain and encroaching darkness, Anthony saw Clara standing over him, the gun now hanging limply at her side. Her face was a mask of shock, as if she couldn't quite believe what she'd done. "I just wanted you to love us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the screams and commotion filling the church. As consciousness began to slip away, Anthony's last coherent thought was a prayer. Not for himself, but for the people he'd hurt. For Rebecca, for Clara, for Isabella, for his congregation. He prayed for forgiveness, for healing, for a way forward through the mess he'd created. As Anthony Cole lay bleeding on the altar, his perfect life shattered into a million pieces. The question wasn't just whether he would survive, but who else would be caught in the devastating fallout of his unholy secrets. The shots that rang out in the Lighthouse Tabernacle that Sunday morning echoed far beyond its walls, sending ripples through the community and leaving a trail of devastation. Pastor Anthony Cole, once the charismatic leader of a thriving congregation, now lay in a Detroit hospital bed, hovering between life and death. Doctors worked to stabilize him, but his condition remained critical. 3 bullet wounds, 2 to the chest, 1 to the abdomen, had caused severe damage. Days would pass before anyone knew if he would survive, let alone recover. Rebecca, her clothes still stained with her husband's blood, kept a constant vigil at his bedside. Her world had been torn apart twice in as many days, first by the revelation of Anthony's infidelity and secret child, then by the violent attack that had nearly taken him from her. She moved between profound grief, searing anger, and a desperate, fragile hope that somehow they would find a way through this nightmare. Clara Cruz was in police custody, charged with attempted murder and other offenses. Her image, standing in the church doorway, gun in hand, was splashed across every news outlet in Detroit. To some, she was a villain, a scorned woman who had resorted to violence in a fit of jealous rage. To others, her story struck a chord. A single mother betrayed, abandoned, pushed to the brink by years of secrecy and broken promises. Isabella, the innocent child at the center of it all, was placed in protective custody. Social services worked to locate her closest relatives, a process complicated by the sudden public revelation of her paternity. She was confused, frightened, and desperately missed her mother, unable to grasp the gravity of what had happened. The congregation of the Lighthouse Tabernacle was left reeling, their faith shaken to its core. The church that had been a symbol of hope now stood as a crime scene, yellow police tape a stark contrast to the celebratory banners that still hung from its walls. In the days that followed, a flurry of revelations came to light. Financial records showed years of payments from Anthony to Clara, funds siphoned from church accounts through a complex web. Church elders, investigating further, uncovered a pattern of deceit that went beyond just the secret family. There were questionable real estate deals, inflated expense reports, a lifestyle that did not match the modest salary Anthony claimed. The media descended, eager to pick apart every detail of the scandal. Reporters camped outside the hospital, the church, even Rebecca's home, hungry for any new development. The story had all the elements of a sensational headline: secrets, lies, violence, all set against the backdrop of a supposedly righteous religious community. For Rebecca, the constant scrutiny was almost unbearable. She had gone from being the admired wife of a respected pastor to an object of pity and speculation overnight. People whispered behind her back, wondering how she could have been so blind, debating whether she had known about Anthony's deceptions all along. Despite the betrayal, despite the public humiliation, Rebecca found herself unable to completely turn her back on the man she had loved for so long. She prayed for his recovery, even as she grappled with the question of whether their marriage could survive this ordeal. The bullet that struck Anthony Cole had not only pierced his body, but had ripped open a wound in the heart of the community. As the world watched, the full, sordid truth of Pastor Anthony Cole's life was about to be laid bare, threatening to consume everyone in its path. With Anthony Cole clinging to life, the focus shifted to the aftermath. The initial shock gave way to a relentless pursuit of answers. Forensic accountants, brought in by the church board, began to comb through the finances of the Lighthouse Tabernacle. What they discovered was a shocking web of financial fraud. Years of siphoned church funds, funneled into offshore accounts and used for luxury purchases that had no place in a pastor's declared income. The media, already in a feeding frenzy, devoured every new detail, broadcasting the sordid truth across Detroit and beyond. The image of the righteous Pastor Anthony Cole crumbled with each headline, replaced by that of a calculating con artist. Rebecca, still reeling from the double blow of betrayal and public humiliation, found herself thrust into an unexpected leadership role. The church, once a source of comfort, now felt like a battlefield. Congregation members, some angry, some heartbroken, looked to her for answers. She faced skepticism, even outright blame. How could she not have known? Had she been complicit? The whispers were relentless. Yet in the face of this overwhelming burden, Rebecca found a strength she never knew she possessed. It came from an unexpected source: the innocent child Isabella, caught in the crossfire of her parents' fractured lives. Rebecca knew she needed to understand, not just the financial deceit, but the emotional one. She requested a meeting with Clara Cruz, now held in a county detention center. The air in the visitation room was thick with unspoken pain when they finally sat across from each other, two women whose lives had been irrevocably altered by the same man. The initial moments were tense, raw. Clara's eyes, hardened by years of resentment, met Rebecca's, filled with a mix of grief and a desperate need for clarity. "Why?" Rebecca asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you do this?" Clara, her voice hoarse, recounted years of feeling abandoned, of Isabella growing up without her father, of Anthony's broken promises, and the crushing weight of secrecy. As Clara spoke, Rebecca began to see not just a woman of rage, but a woman consumed by a profound sense of injustice, a mother fighting for her child's recognition. And in Clara's pain, Rebecca saw echoes of her own. They were both victims of Anthony's deception, albeit in different ways. In that raw, shared space of hurt, a tentative understanding began to form. Rebecca, looking at Clara, then thinking of Isabella, made a profound commitment. She would ensure Isabella was cared for, that she would not suffer for her father's sins. It was a shared purpose, a fragile bridge built over the wreckage of betrayal, forging an unlikely bond between the pastor's wife and his hidden lover. But as Anthony Cole slowly stirred from his coma, the true reckoning for his actions was yet to begin, and the path to forgiveness, if it existed at all, would be long and arduous. Weeks turned into months. Anthony Cole, against all odds, regained consciousness. The physical wounds would heal, but the emotional scars ran deep. Rebecca, her face etched with exhaustion but her resolve firm, was there when he finally opened his eyes. The confrontation was quiet, devastating. Anthony, stripped of his public facade, confessed everything. The lies, the deceit, the years of living a double life, it all spilled out in a torrent of shame and remorse. He admitted his failings, the damage he had caused to Rebecca, to Clara, to Isabella, and to the very faith he claimed to uphold. Anthony faced the consequences of his actions. He pleaded guilty to the charges against him, accepting a lengthy prison sentence for the financial fraud and the pain he had inflicted. It was a fall from grace that resonated far beyond Detroit, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability. Back in Detroit, Rebecca, with a strength born of unimaginable pain, took on the monumental task of rebuilding the Lighthouse Tabernacle. It was a painful, arduous process. She led with transparency, confronting the church's financial misdeeds head-on, implementing new oversight, and focusing on genuine community service rather than outward show. Slowly, painstakingly, the congregation began to heal, finding renewed faith not in a flawed leader, but in the power of their shared purpose and Rebecca's unwavering commitment. Clara Cruz, too, faced her own reckoning. She served her time, a period of profound reflection and change. Upon her release, she chose a path of advocacy, using her story to speak out against domestic abuse and the hidden struggles of single mothers. She found a new voice, one that resonated with authenticity and a desire to help others avoid the pitfalls she had endured. And Isabella, the child caught in the crossfire, found stability in an unconventional family unit. Rebecca, honoring her commitment, became a constant, loving presence in Isabella's life. Over time, as Clara healed and rebuilt her own life, a tentative, fragile reconciliation began between the two women, bound by their shared connection to Isabella and their mutual desire for her well-being. Isabella grew up surrounded by a love that, while unconventional, was deeply genuine. Years later, after Anthony's death in prison, Isabella discovered a hidden letter among his belongings. It was addressed to Rebecca. In it, Anthony poured out his heart one last time, a final, poignant confession of his regrets, an expression of profound remorse, and a surprising, heartfelt pride in Rebecca's resilience and the strength she had shown in the face of his failures. For Rebecca, the journey had been long and fraught with pain. But in the end, she found her own meaning of grace. Not in a life free from hardship, but in the courage to confront truth, the capacity for forgiveness, and the enduring power of compassion. The story of Pastor Anthony Cole and the shattered pulpit became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the devastating cost of secrets and deception. But it also stood as a powerful demonstration of healing, resilience, and the messy, beautiful reality of human connection, proving that even from the deepest brokenness, new paths to redemption can emerge. The story of Anthony Cole, Rebecca, and Clara is a stark reminder of the devastating cost of secrets, the profound impact of betrayal, and the long, difficult road to accountability. It shows us that even in the most sacred spaces, human flaws can lead to catastrophic consequences. Yet within this tragedy, we also witness the remarkable strength of the human spirit, the capacity for resilience, the courage to confront painful truths, and the unexpected paths to healing. Rebecca and Clara, once adversaries, found common ground in their shared experience, forging a bond for the sake of an innocent child. Their journey highlights that forgiveness, while challenging, can lead to a deeper, more authentic understanding of grace. This narrative forces us to consider what is the true cost of a lie, and how do we find redemption when our world shatters? If this story of secrets and shattered lives resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe to 24/7 True Crime Chronicles for more deep dives into the shadows of human experience, and let us know in the comments, what do you think is the true cost of a lie?